Julian lived in the shadows of greatness. He was an art restorer, a man who spent his life breathing life back into the fading masterpieces of the Renaissance. While the world looked at the finished canvases in the grand galleries, Julian looked at the cracks, the layers of old varnish, and the hidden brushstrokes of long-dead geniuses. He lived in a quiet, dust-mote-filled studio in the heart of Florence, his fingers permanently stained with the rare pigments of ultramarine and burnt sienna. He was a man of immense patience and terrifying talent, but he lacked ambition. His only anchor to the world of the living was Evelyn. She was an aspiring painter, 20 years younger, with a fire in her eyes that Julian mistook for passion. He poured his life's knowledge into her, teaching her the secrets of the old masters, how to mix light with shadow, how to make a portrait look as if it were breathing. To Julian, Evelyn was his final greatest restoration. To Evelyn, Julian was merely a ladder she intended to kick away once she reached the top. One winter evening, Julian discovered a secret. Hidden beneath a dull 18th century landscape he was restoring, he found a lost masterpiece by a legendary artist. It was a painting of a woman that seemed to hold the secrets of the universe in her eyes. It was worth a fortune, but to Julian, it was a sacred trust. He showed it to Evelyn, his heart full of trust. "This will change our lives," he whispered. But the change was not what he expected. 3 days later, Julian woke up to an empty studio. The masterpiece was gone, along with all his research and his rare pigments. He found a note on the easel, not from Evelyn, but from Baron Vance, the city's most ruthless art dealer. Evelyn had not only stolen the painting, but had claimed she found it herself, framing Julian for the theft of the original landscape. By the time the police arrived, Evelyn and Vance were already on a private jet to London, leaving Julian to face a prison cell and the total destruction of his reputation. He was left with nothing but a blank canvas and the cold, gray realization of her betrayal. The years that followed were a trial of the soul. Julian spent his time in a damp, lightless cell, his hands trembling as he mimicked the motions of painting on the cold stone walls. He didn't lose his mind. He sharpened it. He learned to see in the dark. He realized that the world was built on layers, much like a painting, and that the top layer was always a lie. When he was finally released, he was an old man in appearance, but a titan in spirit. He moved to a remote village in the Alps, where the light was pure and the silence was absolute. There, he discovered a new way of creating art. He found a way to extract pigments from the very earth and minerals that surrounded him, creating colors that didn't just reflect light. They seemed to consume it. He became the Ghost of the Alps, a mysterious figure whose works began to appear in the world's most exclusive auctions, signed only with a thumbprint in crimson. He was no longer a restorer. He was a creator of a new, haunting reality. Evelyn, now the Queen of the art world, and Baron Vance had built an empire on the stolen masterpiece. They lived in a palace of glass and steel, their lives a constant whirl of champagne and vanity. But their empire was hollow. Evelyn's own talent had withered. She could only replicate the styles of others, and the world was beginning to notice. They were desperate for a new sensation to save them from a looming financial collapse. That was when they heard of the Ghost's latest work, a triptych called The Weight of a Lie. It was said to be the most beautiful and terrifying thing ever painted. Evelyn and Vance used every connection they had to secure an exclusive private auction. They didn't know that the Ghost had been waiting for them. They didn't know that every color in that painting had been mixed with the memory of their betrayal. Julian, hidden behind a corporate veil, had orchestrated their desperation, leading them toward a final exhibition that would serve as their altar of sacrifice. The exhibition was held in a black-walled gallery in London. The air was thick with the scent of turpentine and expensive perfume. Evelyn arrived, draped in diamonds that felt like cold chains against her skin. She looked at the center of the room, where a large canvas was covered by a heavy velvet shroud. Baron Vance stood beside her, his eyes greedy for the profit this painting would bring. They had spent their last remaining millions to secure the rights to this work, believing it would restore their fading glory. Julian stood in the shadows of the balcony above, watching them. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore his old stained apron, his hands steady. He signaled to the attendants. As the velvet shroud fell, the room went silent. It wasn't a beautiful landscape or a poetic portrait. It was a hyper-realistic depiction of a studio in Florence, showing a young woman holding a torch to a man's life, while a dark figure watched from the car outside. It was a painting of their crime, rendered in such exquisite detail that it felt more real than the people standing before it. The guests gasped. The press, invited by a mysterious benefactor, began to flash their cameras. The painting wasn't just an image, it was an indictment. Julian stepped out from the shadows into the light. The room froze. Evelyn's face went a sickly shade of gray, a color Julian had once taught her how to mix. "Evelyn," he said, his voice a calm, rhythmic pulse in the silence. "You told me that art is about what people want to see, but true art is about what they are afraid to see." He held up a small vial of the rare pigments he had used. "Every stroke on this canvas is documented. Every layer reveals the truth of the masterpiece you stole and the man you tried to bury." At that moment, the doors opened and the authorities entered. The provenance of the stolen painting had finally been traced back to Vance's illegal vaults, thanks to Julian's years of meticulous evidence gathering. The empire of glass and steel began to shatter, one shard at a time, reflecting the ruined faces of its creators. An hour later, as Evelyn was led out in handcuffs, she looked at Julian. Her eyes were no longer full of fire. They were empty, like a canvas that had been washed with too much acid. "Why?" she whispered. "You could have had everything. We could have been the greatest." Julian looked at her with a profound, weary sadness. "I already have everything, Evelyn. I have the truth. You only have the frame." He watched as they took her away, her expensive heels clicking on the marble floor like a ticking clock that had finally run out of time. He walked back to the painting and took a small brush from his pocket. He added one final tiny stroke of crimson to the eye of the woman in the painting, the master's lost masterpiece. And suddenly, the woman looked alive. She looked free. Julian had not only reclaimed his life, he had finished the work of the master, proving that the light of truth can penetrate even the thickest layers of a lie. Julian returned to his mountains, but he didn't return to the shadows. He opened a school for young artists, teaching them that the most important tool a painter possesses is not the brush, but the conscience. He lived a long, quiet life, surrounded by the colors of the earth and the silence of the peaks. Evelyn and Vance were forgotten, their names erased from the galleries and the history books, becoming nothing more than a footnote in the story of a great man's resilience. The lost masterpiece was returned to the city of Florence, where it became a symbol of justice and the enduring power of the human spirit. Julian never painted for money again. He painted because the world was a beautiful, complex masterpiece that deserved to be seen clearly. As he sat on his porch, watching the sunset turn the sky into a canvas of gold and violet, he took a deep breath. The palette was clean. The brushes were still. The masterpiece of his life was finally, perfectly complete. A lie can be painted over 1,000 times, but the truth is a pigment that never fades. Evelyn thought she could steal the light, but she forgot that light only reveals what is hidden in the dark. Julian proved that the most powerful weapon an artist has is the patience to wait for the final stroke. The final question: if your life was a canvas, would you be proud of the layers you've hidden? Or would you be brave enough to show the world the true colors of your soul? Thank you for being a part of this masterpiece of Retribution. If you believe that justice is the greatest work of art, subscribe to Whispering Pines Echoes. Until next time, keep your eyes open.